The morning started like any other on Kepler 442b. Dr. Sarah Chun checked the atmospheric readings from her research station, a modest dome nestled in the purple grasslands of what the colonists had nicknamed New Eden. The twin suns cast their golden light across the alien landscape, illuminating the crystalline formations that dotted the horizon. Like frozen lightning. Sarah had been studying the local ecosystem for 3 years now, documenting the fascinating symbiotic relationships between the native flora and fauna. Her specialty was xenobiology, and this planet offered discoveries that could revolutionize humanity's understanding of life itself. The indigenous species here were unlike anything in Earth's fossil record, a perfect blend of reptilian and mammalian characteristics that defied conventional evolutionary theory. The Kithara were the planet's apex predators, standing nearly 8 feet tall with sleek, scaled hides that shimmered with bioluminescent patterns. Their elongated skulls housed enlarged brain cavities, suggesting high intelligence, though they seemed to operate on pure instinct when hunting. What fascinated Sarah most was their pack behavior and their treatment of their young. The cubs were born helpless and required months of intensive care. Much like human infants, Sarah's research station sat on the edge of Kithara territory, close enough to observe but supposedly far enough to avoid conflict. The creatures had shown no interest in the human settlement until recently. Strange energy readings had been detected in the upper atmosphere, and the normally docile herbivores had begun migrating away from the area in massive herds. As Sarah reviewed her data logs, her communication array crackled to life. Research Station 7, this is Colony Command. We're detecting multiple heat signatures approaching your position from the north. Recommend immediate evacuation to designated Safe Zone Alpha. Sarah frowned, pulling up the thermal imaging feed. Dozens of bright spots moved across her screen in organized formations, too organized for wild animals. Command, these readings look like vehicles. Are we expecting a supply drop? Negative, Station 7. Those signatures match no known human or Kithara patterns. Initiating emergency protocol. You have 15 minutes to gather essential data and evacuate. The scientist's blood ran cold. First contact protocols existed for a reason, but they had never been tested under hostile circumstances. She began frantically downloading her research files onto portable drives when the first explosions lit up the northern horizon. Pillars of orange flame rose into the violet sky, and the ground shook beneath her feet through her observation window. Sarah could see them now, sleek, angular craft that moved with predatory grace above the tree line. They were unlike anything in human design philosophy, all curves and organic flowing lines that seemed to ripple through the air rather than fly. Energy weapons lanced down from their hulls, setting the purple grasslands ablaze. The Kithara pack she had been studying for months burst from their den site, the adult males forming a defensive perimeter around the females and cubs. Sarah had never seen them move so fast. Their powerful legs propelled them across the terrain in bounds that covered 30 feet at a time. But the alien attackers were faster. Beams of coherent light struck down the leading males, their bioluminescent patterns flaring once before going dark forever. Sarah's hands trembled as she sealed the research data. Through her external cameras, she watched in horror as the attack escalated. The Kithara fought with savage determination, but their natural weapons were useless against energy shields and aerial superiority. The attackers seemed intent on complete annihilation, showing no interest in capture or communication. One of the alien craft broke off from the main assault and turned toward Sarah's station. She grabbed her emergency pack and ran for the rear exit, but it was too late. The building's structural supports groaned as energy beams carved through the reinforced walls like butter through paper. Heat washed over her as her life's work began to burn. The rear section of the station collapsed, trapping her in the central laboratory. Smoke filled the chamber, and emergency lighting bathed everything in hellish red. Sarah pulled her shirt over her nose and mouth, desperately searching for another way out. The main computer core was already melting, 3 years of research dissolving into slag. That's when she heard them. High-pitched cries from somewhere outside the burning building. not human cries. The distinctive distress calls of Kithara cubs, against every survival instinct. Sarah followed the sound to a partially collapsed wall section. She could squeeze through the gap, but it would mean going outside where the alien hunters prowled. The cries came again, closer now, filled with desperate need. She found them huddled in a shallow depression that had once been part of her station's foundation. 5 Kithara cubs, their silver scales dull with shock, their bioluminescent patches flickering weakly. The smallest couldn't have been more than a few weeks old. Their parents lay nearby, their bodies still smoking from energy weapon impacts. The cubs recognized her. She had observed them often enough that her scent was familiar. They pressed against her legs, seeking the warmth and protection that their slain parents could no longer provide. Their soft mewing sounds cut through the chaos of the burning landscape. Sarah looked toward the evacuation route. Her transport would be arriving at the designated coordinates in 10 minutes. She could make it if she ran now, but not with 5 helpless alien cubs. They would slow her down, make noise, draw attention from the prowling attackers. Every tactical consideration screamed at her to leave them, but as she looked into their large, intelligent eyes, so similar to a human child's, she knew she couldn't abandon them. These creatures weren't just research subjects anymore. They were orphans, lost and afraid in a world that had suddenly become hostile. Their trust in her was absolute and heartbreaking. "Okay, little ones," she whispered, gathering the cubs against her chest. "We're getting out of here together." The smallest one nuzzled against her neck, its body trembling with fear and cold. Sarah felt its rapid heartbeat against her ribs and made a silent promise. Whatever it took, she would keep them safe. These cubs represented not just the future of their species, but proof that intelligence and compassion could transcend the boundaries between worlds. Above them, the alien craft continued their methodical destruction, unaware that their perfect genocide had just acquired a significant flaw. A human scientist with nothing left to lose except 5 alien lives that had somehow become more precious to her than her own. Sarah's emergency shelter training had never covered carrying 5 alien cubs through a war zone. The smallest one, barely the size of a house cat, clung to her shoulder while she cradled the others against her chest. Their combined weight made running impossible, but staying put meant certain death as the alien hunters methodically swept the area. The evacuation point lay 2 kilometers south through dense crystal formations that would provide cover from aerial detection. Sarah's modified hiking boots found purchase on the slippery mineral surfaces as she navigated the maze-like structures. Behind her, the research station's fuel cells exploded in a chain reaction that painted the sky orange and sent tremors through the ground. The cub's bioluminescent patches had dimmed to almost nothing, a natural camouflage response she had documented but never witnessed under stress. Their natural instincts were helping them survive, but they were still far too young to survive on their own. The eldest, about the size of a medium dog, kept looking back toward where its parents had fallen, making soft whimpering sounds that broke Sarah's heart. 15 minutes into their escape, Sarah's communication device buzzed with an incoming message. "Station 7, respond immediately. Evacuation transport is holding at coordinates for 30 seconds only. Hostile craft detected moving toward extraction point." Sarah pressed herself against a crystal formation and activated her emergency beacon response. "Command, I'm en route but delayed. Do not wait for me. Repeat, do not compromise the evacuation from my position." "Sarah, what's your status?" "We're reading multiple heat signatures at your location." She looked down at the 5 pairs of alien eyes watching her with complete trust. "I have ... complications, additional survivors who need extraction." "Understood. Colony ship Horizon is maintaining geosynchronous orbit. We'll coordinate secondary pickup once the immediate threat is neutralized." The transmission cut off, leaving Sarah alone with her charges in the alien wilderness. Through gaps in the crystal formations, she could see the evacuation transport lifting off, pursued by 2 sleek hunter craft. Beam weapons flickered between them like deadly fireworks before the human ship jumped to hyperspace. leaving contrails of distorted light across the purple sky. The cubs huddled closer as the sound of approaching engines grew louder. Sarah pressed deeper into the crystal maze, following paths barely wide enough for her shoulders. The formations here were older, worn smooth by wind and weather into flowing organic shapes that reminded her of frozen ocean waves. One of the hunter craft passed directly overhead, its hull gleaming with the same bioluminescent patterns she had seen on adult Kithara. The realization hit her like ice water. These attackers weren't just alien invaders. They were Kithara themselves, but changed somehow, evolved or augmented beyond their natural state. She remembered her research notes about Kithara's social structure. They were intensely territorial but rarely engaged in warfare beyond ritualized combat. These attackers moved with military precision that spoke of outside influence or technological enhancement. Someone or something had turned the planet's apex predators into an army. The smallest cub began making distress calls again, its voice barely a whisper but still too loud for their current situation. Sarah gently stroked its scaled head, feeling the rapid flutter of its pulse through paper-thin skin. It was dehydrating. All of them were. Kithara cubs needed specialized nutrients that she couldn't provide. As if reading her thoughts, the eldest cub began moving away from the group, following scent trails invisible to human senses. It paused every few steps to look back at Sarah, clearly wanting her to follow. The others stirred restlessly, their instincts telling them something their conscious minds couldn't articulate. "You know where to go, don't you?" Sarah whispered. "There's a place your parents would have taken you." The cub's bioluminescent patches flared briefly in what she had learned to recognize as acknowledgement. It began moving again, leading them deeper into the crystal formations toward structures that looked less natural. Ancient Kithara architecture, perhaps, or something older still. 20 minutes of careful travel brought them to a hidden valley where the crystal formations opened into a natural amphitheater. At its center stood a structure that defied easy description: part building, part living organism, with walls that pulsed gently with internal light. Kithara symbols were carved into its surface, but underneath were older markings in a script Sarah didn't recognize. The cubs' excitement was palpable as they approached the structure. Their patches began glowing more brightly, responding to some signal Sarah couldn't detect. A section of the organic wall dilated like an iris, revealing a chamber beyond that hummed with soft, warm light. Inside, Sarah found herself in what could only be described as a nursery. The walls were lined with alcoves perfectly sized for Kithara cubs, each one containing cushioning material that looked like metallic moss. More importantly, crystal formations throughout the chamber dripped with a luminescent fluid that made the cubs chirp with hunger. "A refuge," Sarah breathed. "Your people built this place for emergencies." She helped the cubs reach the feeding crystals, watching as they instinctively knew how to extract the nutrients they needed. Their bioluminescent patches brightened with each drop of the alien sustenance, and their distress calls faded to contented humming. While the cubs fed, Sarah explored the chamber more thoroughly. The symbols on the walls told a story she could piece together, fragments from her linguistic studies. There had been wars before, conflicts that had driven the Kithara to create hidden sanctuaries for their young. But the older symbols spoke of something else entirely: visitors from the stars, teachers who had shared knowledge before disappearing into legend. A soft chime drew her attention to a wall alcove, where a crystalline display had activated. Images flowed across its surface: star charts, tactical information, and most disturbing of all, footage of the current attack. But the perspective was wrong. These weren't Kithara attackers at all. The recordings showed the true enemy, a species Sarah had never seen before. Bipedal but insectoid, with compound eyes and mandibles that clicked with mechanical precision. They were using captured Kithara technology, their ships disguised with holographic projectors to appear as native craft. The goal wasn't conquest, it was provocation. They wanted the humans to think the Kithara had turned hostile. They wanted a war between species that might otherwise become allies. Sarah's blood ran cold as the full scope of the deception became clear. Somewhere in space, human and Kithara fleets were probably already mobilizing against each other, each side believing the other had struck first. The real enemy would wait until both species had exhausted themselves before moving in to claim the spoils. The cubs had finished feeding, and were now exploring their ancestral sanctuary with growing confidence. The eldest approached Sarah and gently touched her hand with its snout, a gesture of gratitude that needed no translation. But gratitude wouldn't be enough to prevent an interstellar war based on lies. Sarah activated her emergency communicator, praying that someone in the human fleet would listen before it was too late. She had evidence of the deception, proof that could prevent a catastrophic misunderstanding. But first, she had to survive long enough to share it. Outside the sanctuary, the sound of approaching engines grew louder. The false Cathara hunters had found their trail, and this time they wouldn't be satisfied with simple destruction. They needed to eliminate all witnesses to their deception, including one human scientist and 5 alien cubs who had accidentally stumbled onto the truth. The sanctuary's defenses activated the moment the first enemy craft appeared over the valley rim. Ancient Cathara technology hummed to life, projecting energy barriers that shimmered like soap bubbles around the hidden structure. Sarah watched through the translucent walls as the insectoid attackers' weapons fire splashed harmlessly against the shields, but the barriers were old, powered by crystal matrices that had been dormant for decades. With each impact, their glow dimmed slightly. Sarah could see hairline cracks forming in the power crystals. The sanctuary could protect them for now, but not indefinitely. The cubs pressed close to her legs, their bioluminescent patches pulsing in synchronized patterns she had never seen before. They were communicating, she realized, sharing information through biological signals that bypassed spoken language entirely. The eldest raised its head and looked directly at Sarah, then moved toward a section of wall she hadn't noticed before. When it placed its small paw against a crystal panel, the wall dilated to reveal a hidden chamber. Inside, Sarah found something that made her heart race, a Cathara communication array, its organic circuits still functional after years of neglect. The display showed active signals throughout the galaxy, including several that bore human encryption signatures. "You're trying to tell me something," Sarah murmured, studying the complex readouts. The cubs arranged themselves around the console, their combined bioluminescence creating patterns that matched those on the display. Slowly, understanding dawned. The sanctuary wasn't just a refuge. It was a communications hub, designed to coordinate with other hidden sites across Cathara space. More importantly, it had been modified at some point to interface with human technology. Someone had been preparing for this day, planning for the possibility that the two species might need to work together. Sarah's hands flew over the organic interface, her xenobiology training helping her understand the biomechanical controls. The system was incredibly sophisticated. It could tap into both human and Cathara fleet communications, decode their encryption protocols, and even project false signals to confuse enemy sensors. She accessed the human fleet channels first. Her security clearance is still valid despite being listed as missing in action. What she found made her stomach clench. Admiral Harrison's voice crackled through the speakers. "Cathara forces have committed unprovoked genocide against our research colonies. We are authorized to respond with extreme prejudice." On the Cathara channels, the message was equally damning. Pack leader Vorthic's deep rumble carried notes of rage that needed no translation. "The star-walking prey have betrayed the ancient packs. Their settlements burn our sacred grounds. The hunt call is given." Both fleets were moving toward a confrontation that would devastate two species based on lies manufactured by a third. Sarah had perhaps hours before the first shots were fired, starting a war that might never end. The cubs seemed to understand the urgency. They arranged themselves at different stations around the chamber, their patches glowing as they interfaced with the sanctuary's systems in ways Sarah couldn't comprehend. Suddenly, the main display shifted to show tactical positions of all three fleets human, Cathara, and the hidden insectoid force lurking in the outer system's asteroid belt. Sarah began recording her testimony, explaining the deception and providing the visual evidence from the sanctuary's archives. But even as she worked, she could hear the enemy craft outside growing more persistent. Their weapons had shifted to a different frequency, one that was slowly overwhelming the sanctuary's ancient defenses. The smallest cub suddenly chirped in alarm, its patches flashing red in the universal warning pattern. Through the sanctuary's sensors, Sarah could see why. The insectoids were landing troops. Armored figures with too many legs and clicking mandibles were rappelling down energy tethers, carrying weapons that glowed with the same sinister light as their ships. "We need to get this transmission out before they break through," Sarah told the cubs, though she wasn't sure they understood her words. But they seemed to grasp her intent. The eldest moved to a different console and began manipulating controls with its small claws. The communication array's output power spiked, drawing energy from the sanctuary's failing shields. Sarah realized what the cub was doing, sacrificing their protection to ensure the message would reach both fleets. It was a calculated risk that could save billions of lives or get them all killed in the next few minutes. Sarah's transmission began broadcasting on all frequencies, her recorded testimony intercut with visual evidence of the deception. She watched the signal propagate through subspace, racing toward the converging fleets at faster-than-light speeds. Whether it would arrive in time was anyone's guess. The first enemy soldiers reached the sanctuary's entrance. Their weapons carved through the weakened barriers like hot knives, sending cascades of sparks across the chamber floor. Sarah grabbed her sidearm, a standard-issue plasma pistol. She had never expected to use and took position behind one of the larger crystal formations. The cubs scattered to defensive positions with an efficiency that surprised her. These younglings had inherited more than just their parents' intelligence. They possessed tactical instincts that spoke to millions of years of evolutionary pressure. The eldest took position near the communication array, clearly determined to protect it even at the cost of its own life. The first insectoid soldier emerged through the breach, its compound eyes scanning the chamber with mechanical precision. Sarah held her breath, hoping they might not immediately notice the concealed occupants. But the creature's head turned directly toward her hiding spot, its mandibles clicking in what might have been amusement. Sarah fired first, her plasma bolt catching the creature center mass. Its armor absorbed most of the impact, but the force was enough to stagger it backwards into its companions. The cubs immediately went on the attack, moving with a coordinated precision that would have impressed their parents. Despite their youth, they were still Cathara apex predators with reflexes honed by evolution. They used their small size to advantage, darting between the soldiers' legs and striking at vulnerable joints in their armor. Their claws couldn't penetrate the protective material, but they could disrupt sensor arrays and weapon targeting systems. More soldiers poured through the breach, but the chamber's narrow confines worked in the defenders' favor. Sarah kept firing, each shot precisely placed to maximize disruption rather than seek killing blows. Her ammunition wouldn't last long, but the transmission was almost complete. The youngest cub's distress call suddenly rose above the chaos, and Sarah's heart sank. It had been cornered by two soldiers near the far wall, its small form trembling but still defiant. One of the insectoids raised its weapon, the barrel glowing with lethal energy. Without thinking, Sarah broke cover and sprinted across the chamber. She tackled the young cub, rolling both of them behind a crystal formation just as the energy beam seared the air where they had been standing. The cub looked up at her with those expressive alien eyes, and for a moment the chaos faded. This was why humans had spread across the galaxy, Sarah realized. Not for conquest or resources, but for moments like this when protecting the innocent became more important than personal survival. The cubs weren't her species, weren't even from her world, but they were children in need of protection, and that was enough. The eldest cub's triumphant chirp told her the transmission had been completed. Whatever happened next, the truth was now racing toward the converging fleets. Sarah just had to keep them all alive long enough for someone to listen to it. The insectoid soldiers' advance faltered as the sanctuary's ancient systems began responding to the cub's presence in ways Sarah hadn't expected. Hidden panels slid open throughout the chamber, revealing defensive mechanisms that had slumbered for generations. Crystalline turrets emerged from the walls, their targeting sensors sweeping across the invaders with predatory focus. Sarah dove for cover as coherent energy beams lanced through the air, forcing the enemy soldiers to take defensive positions behind whatever cover they could find. The cub's bioluminescent patterns shifted to deep blue, a color she associated with satisfaction in her behavioral studies. They had awakened their ancestral home's guardian protocols, but the defenders weren't the only ones adapting. The insectoid commander, distinguishable by the complex geometric patterns etched into its carapace, produced a device that hummed with ominous energy. When activated, it projected a field that began disrupting the sanctuary's biomechanical systems. The defensive turrets wavered and went silent one by one. "They've done this before," Sarah muttered, watching the systematic shutdown of their protections. These creatures had encountered Kithara technology before and developed countermeasures. This wasn't their first genocide. The eldest cub approached her position, its patches now pulsing in urgent patterns. It gestured toward a section of floor she hadn't noticed, where barely visible seams outlined a hidden passage. Sarah understood there was another way out, but it would mean abandoning the communication array and any hope of sending additional warnings through the chamber's failing sensors. Sarah could see the scope of the disaster unfolding above. More insectoid ships were arriving, and they had begun deploying what looked like terraforming equipment. They weren't just planning to eliminate the witnesses, they intended to restructure the planet itself, erasing all evidence of the Kithara civilization. The sound of approaching engines from overhead told her that human and Kithara fleets were also closing in on the system. Her transmission had reached them, but whether they would overcome their mutual suspicion in time to identify the real enemy remained to be seen. The insectoids were counting on the established momentum of interspecies hatred to carry through. Even in the face of contradictory evidence, Sarah made her decision. Staying here would accomplish nothing except getting herself and the cubs killed. But if they could reach the surface, if she could find a way to signal the incoming fleets directly, there might still be a chance to prevent catastrophe. She gathered the cubs close, noting how they instinctively moved to protect each other even in their fear. "We're going up," she told them, though she doubted they understood her words. Actions would have to speak louder than language barriers. The hidden passage led to a shaft that spiraled upward through the crystal formations. Emergency lighting flickered to life as they climbed, powered by the cubs' bioelectric signatures. The youngest struggled with the steep ascent, so Sarah carried it while the others helped by pushing from below. They emerged into a cavern system that honeycombed the valley walls, natural formations enhanced by generations of Kithara engineering. Sarah could see daylight filtering through gaps in the crystal ceiling, painting rainbow patterns on the rough walls. More importantly, she could hear the distinctive whine of human atmospheric fighters engaged in combat with unknown hostiles. The cubs led her through tunnels their instincts remembered, passages used by their ancestors during territorial disputes or natural disasters. Sarah marveled at the genetic memory that guided them, information encoded in their DNA that activated only under extreme circumstances. They reached an observation platform carved into the valley wall just as the first human ships appeared over the horizon. Sarah's heart leaped at the sight of familiar hull designs, but her relief turned to horror as she watched them open fire on authentic Kithara vessels that had clearly been trying to render assistance. Both sides were still fighting the war the insectoids had orchestrated. Even with evidence of the deception in their databases, military commanders on both sides were probably dismissing her transmission as enemy propaganda, too committed to their attack patterns to accept intelligence that contradicted their established objectives. Sarah activated her emergency beacon, broadcasting on military frequencies she hoped would reach the human fighter pilots. "This is Dr. Sarah Chun, xenobiologist attached to Research Station 7. I am transmitting from ground position with clear visual of hostile forces that are not Kithara. Repeat, you are engaging friendly forces while the real enemy masses in your blind spot." The response came immediately, though not from whom she expected. "Dr. Chun, this is Pack Leader Vorthik of the Kithara Fleet. Your transmission reached our command vessel. We have discontinued attacks on human forces, but your people continue hostile action against our defensive formations." Sarah switched to the human command frequency. Human Fleet Command, this is Chun. I have Cathara Command on secondary channel, willing to discuss immediate ceasefire. The real enemy is using the combat chaos to position for system-wide strike. Admiral Harrison's voice cut through the static. Dr. Chun, your status shows Kia as of 6 hours ago. How do we know this isn't enemy deception using captured personnel? The youngest cub chose that moment to make one of its distinctive calls, the sound carrying clearly over Sarah's open com channel. The effect on the Cathara frequency was immediate excited chatter in their native language, followed by Vorthic's voice heavy with emotion. The small ones live. Pack leader Vorthic recognizes the offspring call of the Silver Valley clan. Dr. Chun speaks truth. She has saved our young from the false hunters. Sarah looked down at the 5 cubs arranged around her feet, their patches glowing softly in the dim light. They had become more than just survivors. They were proof that cooperation between species was possible. Living symbols of what both sides stood to lose if the war continued. Admiral Harrison, Sarah continued, I'm uploading tactical data from the sanctuary's sensors. You'll see the real enemy fleet positioning themselves in the asteroid belt, using our conflict as cover for their approach. We have maybe 30 minutes before they're in position to eliminate both fleets simultaneously. The communication channels went quiet except for the background hum of encrypted data transfers. Sarah could only hope that military minds on both sides were analytical enough to recognize the pattern she had uncovered. The eldest cub suddenly pressed against her leg, its patches flashing in alarm. Through the crystal ceiling, Sarah could see new movement in the sky-sleek ships emerging from concealment among the asteroids, their hulls gleaming with predatory grace. The insectoids had decided not to wait for the human and Cathara forces to weaken each other further. They were moving to attack both fleets, while they were still positioned for mutual combat, hoping to destroy any chance of alliance before it could form. Sarah realized with cold certainty that her transmission had forced their hand. They could no longer rely on deception alone. All forces, this is Chun, she broadcast on all frequencies. The real enemy is moving to attack. You have seconds to decide whether you die fighting each other or live by fighting together. Above them, the sky began to burn as 3 different species' weapons lit up the heavens, and the future of the galaxy hung in the balance. The moment Admiral Harrison's voice cut across both human and Cathara frequencies, Sarah knew something fundamental had shifted. All human vessels, this is Fleet Command. Immediate ceasefire with Cathara forces. Unknown hostiles emerging from asteroid field represent primary threat. Repeat, Cathara forces are now designated as provisional allies. Pack leader Vorthic's response came seconds later, his translator rendering the deep growls into crisp English. Cathara fleet acknowledges human alliance proposal. We share targeting data for the true enemy. The nest killers have revealed themselves. From her observation point, Sarah watched the impossible happen. Human and Cathara fighters that had been locked in combat moments before were now forming integrated attack formations. The tactical coordination was rough. Neither side was accustomed to working with the other, but their combined approach caught the insectoid fleet off guard. The cubs pressed closer to Sarah as the battle intensified overhead. Energy weapons painted the sky in brilliant streaks of light, and the thunderous roar of exploding spacecraft echoed through the crystal formations. The youngest whimpered softly, overwhelmed by the chaos, while the eldest maintained a vigilant watch on the surrounding caverns. Sarah's communicator crackled with overlapping transmissions as both fleets struggled to coordinate their response. The insectoid force was larger than anyone had anticipated. Dozens of ships that had been hiding in the asteroid belt, waiting for the perfect moment to strike. Their strategy had been simple: let the humans and Cathara destroy each other, then move in to claim an empty system. But now they faced something they hadn't planned for: 2 species working in concert, combining human tactical flexibility with Cathara raw power. Sarah watched a human frigate use its superior maneuverability to herd an insectoid cruiser into the firing arc of a Cathara dreadnought. The alien ship vanished in a burst of coherent energy that lit up the entire valley. Dr. Chun, Admiral Harrison's voice reached her through the chaos. "We need more intelligence on enemy capabilities. Your sanctuary data is helping, but we're seeing weapon systems that don't match your records." Sarah consulted the sanctuary's database, the cubs helping her navigate the biomechanical interface with their instinctive understanding of their ancestors' technology. "Admiral, I'm seeing references to previous encounters. These insectoids, the Cathara called them the swarm of silent death. They've done this before. Multiple star systems, always the same pattern. Infiltrate, deceive, eliminate." Pack leader Vorthic's translator carried undertones of ancient rage. "The swarm consumed the crystal singers of Arcturus Prime, the gentle builders of the Veil Nebula. They wear the faces of their victims to turn allies against each other. Today, their hunt ends." The battle was beginning to turn. The surprise alliance between human and Cathara forces was proving more effective than either side had imagined. Human ships excelled at rapid strikes and tactical innovation, while Cathara vessels brought overwhelming firepower and shields that could absorb tremendous punishment. Together, they were systematically dismantling the insectoid fleet, but the enemy wasn't finished. Sarah watched in horror as the largest insectoid vessel, a massive construct that dwarfed even the Cathara dreadnoughts, began to glow with ominous energy. Her analysis of the sanctuary's archives told her what was coming: a planet-killer weapon, designed to sterilize entire worlds when conventional conquest failed. "All forces," she broadcast urgently. "The enemy flagship is charging a planetary bombardment system. Based on Cathara historical records, it can destroy all life on the surface within minutes." The response was immediate. Every human and Cathara ship in the system turned toward the massive vessel, pouring fire into its hull. But its shields were too strong, its armor too thick. The planet killer continued charging, its weapon array glowing brighter with each passing second. That's when the cubs began to sing. Sarah had never heard anything like it. A harmonious blend of frequencies that seemed to resonate through the crystal formations themselves. The sound grew louder as the cubs synchronized their calls, creating patterns that made the sanctuary's walls pulse with responsive light. Throughout the valley, other crystal formations began to resonate. Then others, spreading outward in a wave that encompassed the entire region. Sarah realized what was happening. The cubs were activating a planetary defense system. Ancient Cathara technology that had been dormant for millennia, massive crystal spires, began rising from hidden chambers throughout the planet's surface. Each one focused energy from the planet's core, channeling it upward in coherent beams that converged on the insectoid flagship. The combined output was staggering raw. Planetary force directed with surgical precision. The enemy's shields held for perhaps 10 seconds before collapsing under the assault. Moments later, the massive vessel began to break apart, its planet-killer weapon detonating. In a chain reaction that destroyed 3 other insectoid ships in the blast, the remaining enemy forces fled immediately, their ships jumping to hyperspace without bothering to coordinate their retreat. They had encountered something they hadn't planned for, not just an alliance between species, but the awakening of a world's own defenses. As the energy spires sank back into their hidden chambers, Sarah felt a profound sense of completion wash over her. The cubs had saved not just themselves and her, but potentially countless other worlds that might have fallen to the swarm's deception. Their innocent cries for help had become the key to activating defenses their ancestors had left for exactly this situation. "Admiral." Harrison's voice carried new respect as he addressed both fleets. "This is Admiral Harrison to all forces. Stand down from combat alert, Dr. Chun. Your actions today prevented what could have been the worst military disaster in human history. Pack Leader Vorthak, humanity owes the Cathara people a debt we may never fully repay." Vorthak's response was immediate. "The debt is not owed to us alone, Admiral. Your Dr. Chun saved our young when she could have saved only herself. She has shown us that humans possess the pack honor we thought was unique to our kind. Let this day mark the beginning of a true alliance." Sarah looked down at the 5 cubs clustered around her feet. They had stopped glowing, their patches returning to the soft silver luminescence she associated with contentment. The youngest pressed against her leg with a soft purr, while the eldest gazed up at her with what she could only interpret as gratitude. They had all saved each other, she realized. The cubs had given her purpose when her world was burning. She had given them protection when they had nowhere else to turn. Together, they had become something greater than the sum of their parts, living proof that cooperation could triumph over deception, that compassion could bridge any gap between species. The war was over before it had truly begun. Ended by the simple act of a human scientist who chose to save 5 alien children instead of saving herself. Sometimes Sarah thought as she gathered her young charges close, the smallest acts of kindness created the largest ripples across the galaxy. 3 days after the battle, Sarah stood in the cargo bay of the human research vessel Endeavour, watching as specially trained xenobiologists prepared temporary housing for her 5 charges. The cubs had grown notably in just the short time since their rescue, their patches brighter and their movements more confident. The youngest no longer cried at night, though it still preferred to sleep pressed against Sarah's shoulder. The Joint Human Cathara Task Force had worked around the clock to establish first contact protocols that should have taken months to develop. Admiral Harrison and Pack Leader Vorthek had met face-to-face aboard the neutral research station that had hastily been assembled in orbit, marking the first official diplomatic contact between their species. Sarah's role in preventing the war had made her something of a celebrity, but she found the attention uncomfortable. The real heroes in her mind were the 5 cubs who had activated their world's defenses and trusted a strange alien with their lives. They had shown more courage in a few hours than most sentient beings displayed in a lifetime. Dr. Chun? The voice belonged to Dr. Marcus Webb, the expedition's xenopsychologist. The cubs are responding well to the synthetic nutrition formula, but they keep looking for you whenever you leave the bay. I think they've bonded to you as a surrogate parent figure. Sarah wasn't surprised. Cathara Young imprinted strongly on their primary caregivers, and she had been the only constant in their lives since the attack. The eldest, whom she had started calling Guardian for its protective instincts, rarely let her out of its sight. The others had developed distinct personalities as well. The youngest was Echo for its tendency to repeat sounds, while the 3 middle cubs had become swift, wise, and bright for their dominant characteristics. What's the long-term plan? Sarah asked, though she suspected she already knew the answer. Dr. Webb consulted his tablet. The Cathara Council of Packs has formally requested that you serve as cultural liaison for their species. Admiral Harrison has approved the assignment with the recommendation that you be given full diplomatic status. Essentially, you'd be humanity's first ambassador to an alien species. The weight of that responsibility settled on Sarah's shoulders like a physical thing. She looked at the cubs, now playing a complex game that seemed to involve pattern recognition and rapid movement. They had already learned to recognize dozens of human words and were beginning to use simple tools with their increasingly dexterous claws. And the cubs? They would remain with you, of course. The Cathara consider them your pack now, a sacred bond that supersedes even blood relationships. Pack Leader Vorthek has stated that separating you from them would be considered an act of war. Sarah couldn't help but smile at that. The fierce loyalty of the Cathara was already becoming legendary among the human diplomats. When they gave their trust, they gave it completely. A soft chime indicated an incoming transmission. The main display activated to show Pack Leader Vorthek's distinctive features: elongated skull marked with geometric scars that indicated his rank, eyes that held ancient wisdom and newly awakened hope. Dr. Chun, his translator rendered his deep voice. The Council has reached a decision regarding the cubs in your care. We formally adopt you into the Silver Valley Pack, with all rights and responsibilities thereof. You are now Pack Mother to the 5 young ones, and your word regarding their future carries the weight of law among our people. Sarah felt tears threatening to form. I'm honored, Pack Leader. But I should tell you I know very little about raising Cathara young. What if I make mistakes? Vorthic's mandibles spread, and what she had learned was the Cathara equivalent of a smile. All parents make mistakes, Pack Mother Chun. The measure of worthiness is not perfection, but dedication. You have already proven your dedication beyond any doubt. The transmission shifted to include Admiral Harrison, whose weathered features showed the strain of the past few days. Sarah, I want to add the official human perspective. The Interstellar Council has voted unanimously to establish the Human-Cathara Alliance, with you as our primary liaison. We're offering you the rank of Ambassador Plenipotentiary, with full authority to negotiate treaties on behalf of humanity. The cubs had stopped playing and were now watching the conversation with intense interest. Their patches pulsed in patterns Sarah was beginning to recognize as excitement mixed with protective concern. They sensed the importance of this moment, even if they couldn't understand all the words. "What about the swarm?" Sarah asked. "The insectoids who orchestrated this conflict? Are we prepared for their return?" Pack Leader Vorthak's expression darkened. The swarm has operated in the shadows for millennia, picking off isolated species and turning allies against each other. But they have never faced a true alliance before. My war packs are already coordinating with your fleet commanders to develop joint tactics. When they return, and they will return, we will be ready. Admiral Harrison nodded. We're also establishing early warning networks throughout the sector. The Cubs' activation of the planetary defenses has given our engineers incredible insight into defensive technologies we never imagined possible. Some of our best minds are working on integration protocols right now. Sarah looked down at Guardian, who was gently holding Echo while the smallest cub slept. The simple act of compassion protecting the weak while they rested was something that transcended species boundaries. It was what made sapient life worth defending. "I accept," she said finally. "Both positions. But I have conditions." Both leaders waited attentively. The cubs' education and welfare takes priority over all diplomatic functions. They're not just symbols of our alliance, they're children who deserve the chance to grow up in peace. Second, I want research teams dedicated to tracking down other swarm attacks. If there are survivors from other worlds, other species they've targeted, we need to find them and offer assistance. "Agreed," Admiral Harrison said immediately. "Agreed with honor," Pack Leader Vorthak added. "Your conditions show the wisdom that made you worthy of Pack Mother status." As the transmission ended, Sarah felt the cubs gathering around her feet in their familiar protective formation. But this time, it wasn't fear that drove them together, it was anticipation. They were ready for whatever came next. Secure in the knowledge that they had a family that transcended species boundaries, the youngest cub. Echo looked up at Sarah with bright, intelligent eyes and made a soft sound that needed no translation. It was the Cathara word for mother, spoken for the first time by one who would grow up knowing no difference between human and alien, between us and them. In that moment, Sarah realized that the real victory hadn't been preventing a war or defeating the swarm. It had been proving that love, compassion, and family could exist anywhere conscious beings were willing to reach across the void and touch each other's hearts. The galaxy had just become a much smaller, much more hopeful place. 5 years later, Ambassador Sarah Chun stood on the observation deck of the joint Human-Cathara space station New Harmony, watching as the 5 cubs, now young adults, led the first integrated patrol squadron through its training exercises. Guardian commanded the formation with natural authority, while Echo served as communications coordinator. Their unique ability to speak both languages, perfectly making them invaluable for interspecies coordination, the station itself was a marvel of cooperative engineering. Combining human modular construction techniques with Cathara bioarchitectural principles. Living walls pulsed gently with bioluminescent patterns that provided both lighting and emotional feedback for the Cathara residents, while human sections featured familiar metal corridors and standardized equipment interfaces. "Pack Mother Chun," a familiar voice said behind her. Sarah turned to see Vorthak approaching, though his formal title was now Alliance Defense Coordinator. The years had been kind to him, his scars had faded to silver traceries that spoke of wisdom rather than warfare. The Council of Pax has reached a decision regarding the Eco Worlds proposal. Sarah's heart quickened. The Eco Worlds project was her greatest initiative as ambassador, a plan to establish joint colonies throughout the galaxy, each one designed to serve as a refuge for species threatened by the swarm or other predatory civilizations. Named for her youngest cub's gift for bringing different voices together, the colonies would be living demonstrations of interspecies cooperation. And approved unanimously, Vorthek said, his mandibles spreading in what Sarah had long ago learned was a proud smile. Funding for the first 12 colonies has been allocated, with human industrial capacity providing initial construction and Kithara bioengineers handling long-term sustainability systems. Through the observation window, Sarah watched as Swift and Wise executed a complex tactical maneuver that combined human fighter doctrine with Kithara pack hunting strategies. The sight never failed to fill her with wonder, beings from two different worlds working together, with an efficiency that surpassed what either species could achieve alone. Bright, the most technically minded of the cubs, had become the Alliance's chief weapons designer. Their innovations in defensive technology had already prevented 3 swarm incursions, turning once devastating surprise attacks into manageable skirmishes. The integration of human manufacturing precision with Kithara biological adaptation principles was revolutionizing military technology throughout the known galaxy. There's more news, Vorthek continued. The Cetacean League has formally requested admission to the Alliance. Sarah raised an eyebrow. The whale-descended species from the ocean world of Pacifica had been isolationists for centuries, preferring to keep to themselves rather than engage with land-dwelling civilizations. Their decision to seek Alliance membership represented a massive shift in galactic politics. What changed their minds? Your cubs, Vorthek said simply. Swift and Echo visited their world as part of the cultural exchange program. The cetaceans were impressed by beings who could be both fierce warriors and gentle caregivers. They said it reminded them of their own ancestral values. Through her communication implant, Sarah received an update from the Alliance Intelligence Division. 3 more star systems had reported swarm infiltration attempts, but in each case, the early warning networks had detected the deception before it could take hold. The integrated defense protocols, developed from studying the planetary defenses on Kepler 442b, were proving incredibly effective, but the most significant development was less tangible. Spread of what sociologists were calling the shun effect across the galaxy. Other species were beginning to form their own cross-species adoption families. Orphans from war-torn worlds were being raised by loving families from entirely different star systems. The concept of family was expanding beyond biology, beyond even species boundaries. Sarah's personal communicator chimed with an incoming call from Earth. She accepted the connection to find herself looking at her own parents, now proud grandparents to 5 alien cubs they had never met in person but loved unconditionally through video calls and holographic projections. Sarah, honey, her mother said, Guardian's graduation ceremony is being broadcast live on every human world. Your father and I are so proud of all of you. Behind her parents, Sarah could see a wall covered with pictures, graduation photos, commendation ceremonies, family gatherings that included humans and Kithara together. The cubs had gained not just a human mother, but an entire extended family that spanned multiple star systems. Mom, I wish you could be here in person for Guardian's promotion ceremony. We'll make it to the next one, her father promised. The doctors say I'm cleared for interstellar travel as soon as the new medical protocols are approved. The communication ended just as the Cubs patrol squadron returned to the docking bay. Sarah could see them through the transparent aluminum window stall. Graceful beings who moved with deadly efficiency but still gathered together in the protective formation. They had learned as frightened Youngs. Guardian was the first to reach the observation deck, their adult height now matching Sarah's own. Their patches glowed with the deep blue of contentment as they gently touched her shoulder with their snout, the same gesture of affection they had used as a cub. Pack mother, Guardian said in perfect English. though they still preferred the more formal Kithara titles in official settings. The patrol encountered no hostile activity, but we detected long-range sensor sweeps from the Vega sector. Possible swarm reconnaissance. Sarah nodded, already mentally composing the security briefing she would need to send to Alliance Command. But first, she had a more important priority. Echo had just bounded into the observation deck, followed closely by the other 3 cubs, her children, regardless of species or biology. "How was the simulation today?" she asked, gathering them close in the family huddle that had become their tradition after every mission. "Perfect coordination," Swift reported proudly. "The human fighters couldn't keep up with our pack tactics, and the Kithara ships couldn't match our individual initiative. Together we're unstoppable." "The cetacean pilots are learning quickly," Wise added. "Their 3-dimensional thinking from their oceanic background gives them advantages in zero-gravity combat we hadn't considered." Bright held up a small device that pulsed with soft light. "I've also completed the new communication interface that will allow direct neural linking between different species during combat operations. No more translation delays during critical maneuvers." Sarah felt the familiar swell of maternal pride, though it was tinged with concern for the dangers her children would face as they took on greater responsibilities within the Alliance. They were no longer helpless cubs who needed her protection. They were skilled warriors and diplomats in their own right, ready to carry on the work of building bridges between species, but they were still her children. And they always would be. Echo pressed close to her side. Their patches flickering in the pattern Sarah had learned meant deep contentment. "Pack Mother, the Echo Worlds project, will we be involved in establishing the colonies?" "If you want to be," Sarah replied. "But remember, you're not obligated to follow in my path. You can choose any future you want." Guardians straightened to their full height, their voice carrying the authority they would need as a future pack leader. "We choose to honor the legacy you gave us when you saved us from the fire. We choose to protect other orphans as you protected us. We choose to build the galaxy where no child of any species faces the darkness alone." As the 5 young Kithara clustered around their human mother, their bioluminescent patches synchronized into a pattern Sarah had never seen before, one that somehow conveyed love, gratitude, and determination all at once. In the distance, human and Kithara ships moved in precise formations, their crews working together with an efficiency that would have seemed impossible just a few years ago. The nest had indeed burned around her, Sarah reflected. But from those ashes had risen something beautiful, a family that transcended every boundary, an alliance that made the galaxy safer for all innocent life, and proof that sometimes the most important victories came not from strength or strategy, but from the simple decision to save those who could not save themselves. In the end, that was what being human truly meant, not conquest or domination, but the willingness to extend compassion across any divide to any being in need of hope. And that compassion, multiplied across species and star systems, was changing the galaxy itself. The cubs were no longer the only orphans who had found a family among the stars. They were the first of countless others who would grow up knowing that love had no species barriers, that family was defined by choice rather than genetics, and that home could be found anywhere beings were willing to care for each other. The galaxy had learned to dream of a better future, and those dreams were coming true, one rescued life at a time.